Mr. John Davey is the chairman of Ultra Capital, visiting professor at the London Guildhall Faculty of Business and Law, served as chairman of the UK government's advisory group on PPPs for 2 3-year terms, and as member of the UK Financial Services Sector Advisory Board. Past chairman of British Expertise and founder member of UK Islamic Finance. His background is in project management with extensive international experience of finance and management. He has considerable experience in business planning, financial analysis, change management, and creative management processes. He will be moderating this session on financial attractiveness. I will quickly introduce the two panelists. Mr. S. Machendranath, Chairperson, Airports Economic Regulatory Authority of India. After completing MBA from Cochin University, he joined the Indian Police Service, that is the IPS, and thereafter the Indian Administrative Service. An IS officer of the Tamil Nadu cadre, he held several important positions in the government of Tamil Nadu and in the government of India. He has also served as government director in several public sector companies such as Air India, Airports Authority of India, Steel Authority of India Limited, Rashtriya Ispat Nigam Limited, Kudremukh Iron Ore Company Limited, and Metallurgical and Engineering Consultants India Limited. Mr. Harsh Raghavan is the Managing Director and CEO of Fairbridge Capital Private Limited, which provides investment advisory services to Fairfax India Holdings. He has been involved with the Indian private equity industry for nearly 25 years and has previously served as Head of India for Candover Investments, Co-Head of India for Goldman Sachs PIA, and Vice President of Indo-Asian Chase Capital. At Fairbridge, he is responsible for all investment activities for the $5 billion portfolio of Fairfax in India. He serves on the board of directors of Fairfax India Holdings and most of its portfolio companies in India. He holds a Master's of Business Administration degree and a Master's of Science degree in Industrial Engineering from Stanford University and a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of California at Berkeley, where he double majored in computer science and economics. With those introductions, I request Mr. Davey to kindly take charge of the session.
Thank you very much, and thank you for introducing the panelists. I thought by doing it this way, the gentleman on my left and my right will have more time to speak with you. Let me just introduce this session. I think, seriously, this is quite an important issue. The title, Improving the Financial Attractiveness of PPPs. First, you need to understand that whatever you want to do in PPP here in India or anywhere else, about 120 other people each day want to do exactly the same thing with exactly the same money and exactly the same skills. 9 weeks ago, I was with the Secretary General of the GCC Council, the Gulf States, who proudly announced in Lancaster House in London, we have $6.5 trillion worth of projects we'd like to do as PPPs in the next 5 to 6 years. Tony told us this morning there's about 3 to 3.5 trillion a year of PPPs. So they alone want twice what the world can do now. So the reality is other countries are also thinking like that. So whatever you would like to do, no matter how good it is, somebody is competing with you. And the only way you can guarantee success is to do it better than they did. Make it more attractive for the only person in a PPP. There is only one person who counts in a PPP. Let me be contentious for a minute. And that person is the chairman or the chairwoman of a credit committee in a lending institution who has been taught to say, whatever the question is, the answer is no. Now convince me to change my mind. Because it doesn't matter how good I am, he is, all of you are. None of you has got any money. The bankers you're dealing with have no money. The bank might, but the bankers don't. At the end of the day, somebody whose job has a single remit, protect the long-term benefits of my investors. And my investors aren't you and I and the money in our pocket, they're somebody's pension fund. People forget that. Now, with all the competition in the world, it would be a really good idea that if every project started, what are the conditions that somebody will part with somebody else's money for the benefit of your project? But unfortunately, that often gets lost in the world. With these couple of thoughts, I'm going to ask both of the gentlemen perhaps to make some introductory remarks, and then we'll get going. Would you like to make some introductory remarks? Would you like? Okay. Okay. Well, we'll get the regulatory view, and then I'll borrow his wallet in a minute.
Well, thank you. Regulators actually shouldn't be doing this job. But however, since regulation is a reality, the regulator's position is a little, dicey. From the regulatory point, what we can say is that regulation should be more certain. There should be certainty in regulation. There should be consistency, there should be continuity, so that investors know what they are in for when they wish to make large-scale investments in any sector for that matter. The regulation in India has been fairly recent. We have had the ERA Act from 2009 being enforced. The basis for regulation was, drafted in the guidelines. It's a set of guidelines for airport operators. The guidelines detail how regulations will be applied for determination of tariff. It's not only for the airport operator, there's a separate set of guidelines for other operators like cargo operators, ground handling operators, and also fuel farm operators. So these guidelines provide the continuity and the certainty that we look for in regulation. Of course, we have had to change the guidelines sometimes. The guidelines did specify single till. Now the government has changed its stand. We have also changed our stand, realizing that there's a lot of investment needed in the sector. And single till may not be that attractive to the investors. So one way that we have tried to address the issue is to provide for a hybrid till whereby the airport operator gets some funds for further capital investments and so on. The other aspects that deserve mention is that we have a very, very robust stakeholder consultation. Every small thing that we want to do, we put it up for consultation. Recently, we said we are going to, change the depreciation rates. We said, okay, we'll go for a consultation. When we did the normative costs for capital projects, we have done a consultation. So each item is well consulted, thought of, deliberated, put forth for stakeholder consultation, and after that only we take a decision. And when we take it, of course, we will have to take a decision. Sometimes people say, you just consult us and you take your own decision. But then consultation means we have to get to different points of view, get to know different points of view, and then take a considered view of what is good for the sector and from the customer's point of view. So, but we talk of all this mainly, because there's a basic problem. Left to itself, I don't think left to itself, no industry or no sector would like to be regulated. So a regulator's job is not a very pleasant one. Perhaps our approach should be more to have more airports. I don't know. I'm not the policy, formulator or formulating body. Perhaps instead of having a 100 million capacity airport, we should have three airports, maybe in Delhi, and 3 airports maybe in Mumbai, competing with each other for traffic. In which case, the regulator's job becomes much easier. He could perhaps just make these people sit together, or he may not need to exist at all. Then there may be no need for a regulator. Then the regulation comes from the market. But unfortunately, the resources are limited. I know there are problems. If you want to have 3 airports, you need at least about 6,000 acres of land in different places, all accessible from the city. And land acquisition is going to be a very difficult process. So the model that we have chosen is, okay, 1 or 2 airports, there will be a monopolistic sector. Airports will be more controlled by monopolistic entities, and so there is a need for regulation. But still, the certainty part of it in the regulation is something that I think has engaged our attention. And there are different models of PPPs which could perhaps provide more comfort to the investor. Like if you pre-disclose your tariff. Or if the bidding itself is on tariff, you say, okay, this is the kind of airport that we want to build, these are the basic facilities, now you quote which is the lowest rate. One way to look at it is how, who benefits. Like the present model basically favors the government, because whoever gives the highest revenue share gets it. The one that I was talking about, where you base your bid on tariff, that favors the customer. And of course, if you just leave it like that, I suppose the operators will be very, very happy. So with these words, I think I'll stop here, and then let's have the views from the investor. But they are more important, because regulator's job is regulation, not to incentivize people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, from the investor perspective.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you, Chairman ERA, Mr. Machindranath. Very well said, and I'm glad we now are in agreement on the model that favors the government. I think as the introduction provided, Fairfax, we are a large global investment company and operating company. We both invest in and operate businesses around the world. And John, to your point, we have activities in countries as far-flung as Ukraine, Egypt, and several other somewhat off-the-beaten-path countries. However, of our global assets of 40 billion, roughly 5 billion are present in India. So for us, India is the largest investment destination, bar none, outside of North America. And when it comes to the aviation sector in India, I think we've already had a good part of today focused on what's happening in the sector. So I won't repeat a lot of that. The gentleman from Morgan Stanley pointed out many graphs and pie charts. But the sector is booming. 10 years ago, we had just 50 million travelers across the country. Today we're at 120. Our largest airports have 50. A decade from now, we'll probably be at 500 million, according to the projections. And we provide 8 million jobs in the aviation sector and services around that already in this country. So this is a big, important, and booming sector for India. One generation ago, Indians, if they were traveling from Bombay to Delhi or Bombay to Chennai, it was almost obvious that they would travel by train. Today, it is entirely obvious that they will travel by plane. So I think that, again, is a reflection of the fact that through the technology of air travel having come to a reasonable cost and availability across the country, Indians are embracing it. Now, on the regulatory side, I had 3 points I wanted to make around the creation of a regulatory framework, regulating with consistency and transparency being the second, and then the third is regulation and policy setting with vision. So the first of those 3 is the creation of regulatory framework. India, for all for all its sins, India, in 2009, when it created a regulatory framework for the airport sector, was ahead of the curve. Even today in Canada, which is Fairfax's home country, that regulation is still being put into place as they think and prepare to perhaps privatize Toronto and Montreal airports in the coming few years. India did this 10 years ago. So in terms of the creation of the regulatory framework, I think India has done very well in embracing that step as early as it did. And the key elements of that framework, India got absolutely spot on. Creation of a till structure, the definition of a regulatory asset base, the regulated returns with control periods around that. Others are now looking at the Indian model and a few others around the world and templatizing that. But India did some of the hard work. Now, regulating, my second point on regulating with consistency and transparency. This is, of course, what all of us as private participants would wish from a regulator. And when we are early in the formation of a regulatory framework, there are going to be teething problems. And I think I must give credit to Mr. Machendranath and the entire team at ERA for having focused and worked hard towards getting those teething problems out of the way. I'll give you examples. We now have a clearly defined hybrid till that's available for all the airports in the country. This was not the case just 18 months ago, and this is now done and dusted. The definition of what falls into aeronautical revenue and what falls into non-aeronautical revenue within the hybrid till structure. Here, we're not done, but a lot of work has happened towards solidifying and clarifying that framework. Tariff setting, every control period. The regulator has been prompt about requesting information and providing feedback so that private players are not left in a state of confusion over what will the tariffs be in a future period or in a period in progress. So in these areas, I'd say the consistency and transparency we're seeing today is something that, as a foreign investor investing in the airport sector in India, I'd say we look at with a high level of optimism. The third point was regulating and policy setting with vision. Now here, we can always look and obsess over the minutiae around the current decisions that have to be made, the current fine-tuning or nuances that have to be made. But let's face it, we need hubs in India, airport hubs. And some, tongue-in-cheek, will say that we do have hubs, which are Dubai and Doha. But that should not be the case. We want hubs here in India that are hubs for Indian travelers, hubs for international travelers who may transit through India on their way to another part of Africa or Asia. That's what we want as Indians. And so development of hubs, the enablement of major airports in India to become major hubs requires a lot of coordination between airports, airlines, regulators, policy setters. But we must do it. Open skies. This is an area where, again, the license Raj ended decades ago, but the open skies policy is still, unfortunately, even today, a reflection of the license era, and that should be changed. And then, with vision, the development of multimodal frameworks for airports, connecting with metros, trains, drones, to the point that Hari Marar made earlier today. We need to make sure that interoperability, interconnectivity is seamless. No different from when in Hong Kong, you can check in, get your boarding pass, check in your bags in Central, and your bags show up only when you land into Mumbai or Bangalore or wherever else. So we need to have that kind of a vision around the development of our sectors. Those are the 3 points I had on regulation, but I would add one more thing, which is that as a private participant, I think, and I speak for many of the private players out there, I think we recognize that there is a sense of citizenship that is very important in a sector such as airports. At the end of the day, an airport is public infrastructure. It is there, it exists for the service of the community and of the people, and that is a burden, a responsibility that we do not take lightly. Therefore, the onus is on us as airport operators in the country to provide efficient, cost-effective services for the people to make sure that we as a nation prosper.
Thank you. That was really, there were some quite interesting things came out. I was really pleased to hear about the way you're thinking about regulation, because half the battle isn't the regulations as written down, it's the attitude of the regulator and the multimodal thing. For many years, I was involved with the development and the planning of Terminal 5 at Heathrow, which isn't a PPP. It is a 100% private sector enterprise, paid for by the shareholders of what used to be called BAA, now Heathrow Airport Limited. We looked at one time, because Britain's actually very shy about saying what it really does. We looked at congestion in the skies around London, because we have 5 airports. Heathrow is the one everybody knows. Incidentally, all 5 are owned by different people now. So the point that you made is very valid. It's not just a competition thing, because everybody wants to go into Heathrow, and if you've got about £5 million spare in your back pocket, you can buy a slot from somebody. But we looked at the whole issue. Should we be doing short haul from one of the world's biggest hubs? And you're going to have this here at some point as well. So when the railway, which is part of the integral design of Terminal 5, was built to be able to accommodate the Eurostar, which runs from London to Paris. It doesn't run through there, although it has been tried, because our regulators, throughout a whole series of planning things, said there's only a certain amount of muck you can dig out of Heathrow as part of the planning consent. I don't know if any of you have ever been on Eurostar, or better still watched it going through a station at about 100 kilometers an hour. It's about a kilometer long. If you take a train that long, like you have in India, take it underground into a station to reverse it out, you have to build massive tunnels. So in the end, we weren't allowed to build the track big enough to take it in. But it is lunacy for somebody to get on a plane in London to go to Paris or to Brussels or even to Amsterdam. They're just not on. So I would suggest that when you're looking at the attractiveness of investment in your aviation industry here, that you do take this point of not just taking the metro or guided bus lanes or whatever it is to the airport, actually think about fast trains or decent trains, high-speed trains, linking the reasonably near places to the hub. Because even if it's not going to happen today, it would be really nice if he's investing that he knows at some point in the future I could do it. It's actually available to me. So the whole idea of airports is about people being moved around. It's about goods being moved around. It's about creating new industries and jobs. It's not just about flying. So aviation involves the airlines. And remember, nearly all airlines in the world are privately owned now. They weren't always, but they are now. They will only fly to places that they can make a profit in. Low-cost airlines change their flight sequence at least twice a year. So if there's somewhere it just isn't working, they stop going. That needs to be looked at. There is a regulatory issue there. Subsidizing these guys is great, but for how long? How long do you want to subsidize somewhere? There are social bits of aviation. In the UK, for example, we have the Highlands and Islands, a lot of little islands and places up near the north of Scotland. Well, people live there. They all have little airports because it's almost the only way to get in. But they're completely unviable, so that although they're privately run, they're run as a group, but they do get a government subsidy. Now, that is the only bit, as far as I know, of any part of aviation in the UK that's subsidized, because it just wouldn't be sustainable otherwise. Now, again, I think these things need to be looked, because you are talking about a lot of airports here, not Navi Mumbai, which of course is going to be a success because you've got the population sitting right here, or Delhi or something. You need to think about how can you persuade him to get his shareholders to want to go to places that are socially acceptable to you. How is the air traffic management going to be organized? Because you can't just take planes in and drop them down. Or the idea we were talking about over breakfast today, let's have drones moving us all around and vertical taxis and so on. So there's a lot of issues there that you need to be thinking about. And how long do you want an airport to last? Are they going to be what they used to be in the future? Or do you actually want to be looking at things in a slightly different way? So there's a lot of questions there. So on that basis, I was going to say, how flexible do you feel the regulation is? And would it be practical to create an even more flexible not just financial regulation, which is one thing, the market could do it, but the whole ethos of being able to give people independence and the opportunity to travel that maybe today they don't have?
See, there are regulations and regulations. One is the safety regulation and the security regulation. And the flexibility there is very, very limited. Safety and security. I think in the morning they were talking about, seamless movement through the airport. With just a, mobile phone, you just have access to right up to the boarding gates. Now, that needs flexibility on the part of the security regulator to be able to provide for something like that. So far as financial regulation is concerned, I think it's quite flexible. In fact, our approach to regulation is twofold. One is price cap. What we do is we build all the costs. This is a cost plus approach. There what we say is it's price cap. We don't say this is the rate at which you will offer the services. We say this is the maximum tariff that you can take. And very often, airports have taken a lower tariff. Like today, I think in Chandigarh, we had given them a slightly higher cap, but they said, no, it will not be possible for us to compete with Delhi if we go for the full-fledged tariff that you are giving us. So they took a slightly lower one and said, the shortfall we will make up later. Similarly in Trivandrum also. Trivandrum, we just put out the order. They were entitled to a slightly higher tariff. But then they said no. The kind of passengers who are traveling from here to international destinations are not very affluent. They are middle class, lower middle class, working class. So we will keep it slightly lower. So it's price cap regulation, and the airport has the flexibility to fix its tariff. That's the first part of it. The other one is the other operators in the airport, like cargo operators, cargo handlers, ground handling agents, and fuel throughput. We have generally had a light touch approach. We say if it is material and if it is competitive, if it is not material, we just let it go. It's a small amount they are handling. We say, okay, you keep whatever tariff you want. If there is competition, more than 2-3 people in the business, then we say, okay, there is competition. There's no need for our price cap regulation. Whatever you suggest, we will go with it. And even if these two are not there, sometimes we have said, okay, you got good user agreements. We are happy with the user agreements, so we'll go on a light touch approach. We will bless the tariff that you have. So we have a flexible approach towards tariff determination and economic regulation. And even in the till, I think, it was a very hotly debated topic for quite some time. I think we have had a more flexible approach. We have seen a more flexible approach recently because earlier it was more dogmatic. I think we need to be practical, we need to be flexible. But at the same time, there should be some amount of consistency, and there should be, we should be able to meet investor expectations and perhaps customer expectations also. Both are very important for us. So this flexibility is something that we should provide for. I think that's a good thing.
Thank you very much. It's a very enlightened regulatory thought. That consistency is the most important thing. As I've mentioned to many, and I happen to meet a lot of finance ministers in my job, many of them say, oh, I've got a new government, I'm just in, what should I change? I say, nothing. You're here for 4 or 5 years, the concession's here for 25. And really, we all don't want you changing it. You can improve, but don't change things, because that is the worst thing you can do from the perspective of a long-term investor. If we do invest, dead simple, we just put the price up because the risk has increased. I'm going to pass over to Kirshen now.
Remind me, Mr. Machindranath, I think we've been engaging now for perhaps 3 years, and we've been looking at a number of sectors in India for decades. This is the first time that Fairfax has invested and acquired a business in a regulated sector in India. And it is entirely because after reviewing many sectors, and there are opportunities in, of course, in many sectors, but we did appreciate that here we have a very unique situation where the regulator and the Ministry of Civil Aviation are very aligned to the reality, which is that we're living in a fast-paced, fast-changing economy where we can come up with traffic studies, projections, but so far, unlike most other sectors, this is one where all projections have been too sober, and the reality has always been better achievement. I'll give the example of Bangalore Airport. It was originally built with a capacity of 5 million passengers, set to launch in 2008. When it launched, the first day, it was at 8 million passengers, over capacity. Ever since then, they've been increasing capacity incrementally and always been over capacity. So now, when you have that kind of a situation where you're not able to project fast enough, then I think working in a sort of spirit of trust and transparency between the regulator and the private operator, you can result at a win-win outcome for the city, for the country, and of course for everyone. So from our perspective, I think we've seen a lot of open-mindedness, a lot of collaboration, a lot of flexibility from both the ministry and the regulator. I will also just mention, and I think Hari touched upon this when he spoke on his panel a little while ago, but technology is playing an incredible role. The Minister of Civil Aviation spoke about this in the morning as well. Technology is playing an incredible role to shape or reshape the way the workflows, process flows happen at airports. So with the introduction of biometric authentication, with the elimination of baggage tags, rest in peace, I think we're well on our way towards a very streamlined and hopefully delightful process as we go through our airports pretty much every week.
Thank you very much. Before we wrap up, does anybody have any questions for either of our panelists? Yes, please. Could we have a microphone for this gentleman here in the middle?
My name is Surendra Gupte, Director Commercial with Global Aviation. The observation is to do with what Harsha just mentioned about, merely just saying that we want hubs in India, is not going to really serve the purpose. I feel rather it's too late in the day because the horse has already bolted from the stable. Because, there are two probably goalposts that we have already missed. One is in terms of, the sequencing of the bilaterals, which was extremely important. And the second was in terms of the cost competitiveness of airports in India. Now, if you look at, rather than purely looking at an isolated airport operator view, where you look at in terms of the ROI, where we express glee that we have moved away into a hybrid till model, the fact remains that not much thought has gone in terms of the viability of airlines per se. Airports being monopoly service providers, they don't have much of choice, especially airlines in India, where during the last decade, they've hardly been able to even recoup the weighted average cost of capital. Unlike in the US, where we have seen more of capacity discipline, which has been, yielding better retentions for the airlines, here, I would like to borrow a Japanese term called harakiri, because it's not a question of cost plus pricing at all. Now, if you look in terms of developing hubs, basically, you're focused on quite a good amount of transfer traffic at a particular point in the airport. Now, if you look at airports in the south, for example, Now, with almost the entire sector having been opened up to the Gulf and Middle East carriers, prior to that to the European carriers, why would an Indian passenger want to transit a hub in India where he has to pay prohibitive ADF, UDF or whatever the charges that you call, when he has direct connectivity from here to go into an airport in the Gulf where it's just absolutely zero or negligible aid that is being levied, and from there he undertakes his travel to either Europe or North America or wherever for that matter. So, to that context, I find that, it's pretty easy to say that, we need hubs in India, but, the nature and time to have a structured approach, I think we have already missed the bus. And there will be a huge amount of, rethink that will be required if, that has to be developed. The other comment is in terms of, again, the concept of open skies. We all know that bilateral air services or air rights, as we say, which are exchanged between two countries, is absolutely a precious right. It's almost akin to your 3G or 4G for that matter. And most of the governments across, not talking of the move towards protectionism that we've been seeing over the last couple of months, is usually a tool which is used by the government to ensure that there's balance of benefits that are derived. Not be looking at in terms of a silo concept of only aviation, but in terms of overall trade balance that a country has with the other country concerned. So it's an important trade tool per se. It can't be just looked at in terms of, open skies. The experience in the last 60, 70 years has been that it has benefited only smaller countries and states. Like for example, Singapore, if you take it. Now, that's where perhaps maybe, India could have had a much more structured and sequential approach rather than the way that we have gone in.
Thank you, Mr. Gupte. I had been hoping to quickly summarize your question, but I will avoid doing so. But your points are very well taken. It's not easy. We, as a country, we need to plan for generations to come. Anything to embark on any of these initiatives takes decades, not years, and it's not easy. But that does not mean we do not try. At the end of the day, passengers, customers have a choice. They will go to whoever and wherever they get efficiency at a price, at an economical price. So they are commercial animals, as are anyone else. So if the most efficient and most economical choice for them is to go and transit via Dubai, then they will do so, and there's nothing much that any one market participant or even as a country we can do. However, is it always the logical option for them to transit via Dubai? I would argue no. There are many instances where there are others. I will give you two examples of instances right now, live, which are going on not in India but in our region. Sri Lankan Airlines, the government in Sri Lanka has been trying to privatize it. They may or may not succeed in doing so, but certainly it's been well publicized the last couple of years. They've been trying. We have not, Fairfax is in no way involved. But I am aware that those private players who have looked at Sri Lankan Airlines have looked at it primarily with the lens of turning Colombo into a hub into India. That has been the primary agenda around certain market participants looking at Sri Lankan Airlines as a platform. Now, if they find the math works for them, and if customers find it viable to transit Colombo in the future rather than Dubai or Doha, then that's where the market will move. It will move overnight once the systems and processes are put into place. The second example I'll give you. All of a sudden, and when I say that, I'm not talking in quarters or even years, but over the last 4 to 5 years, Addis Ababa has emerged as a hub into Africa. Who would have thought Addis Ababa would be the rightful claimant to that throne? But it's happening. And Ethiopian Airlines has become one of the primary airlines in and out of Africa in a very short span of time. So anything is possible, but we have to try and we have to be patient.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run out of time. This has been a wonderful panel. Thank you. It's lovely to see pragmatic regulation. It's also great to see the enthusiasm. I didn't hear about problems. I heard about solutions. Now, the one thing as a closing remark, you guys in India are probably ahead of most people in airport PPPs. We don't really do them in the UK. We sold all of ours. Most countries, and I worked on the world's biggest one, Beijing Capital Airport, 43 million, 100% state-owned. You actually are in the vanguard of what's happening here. So you have a lot of experience. Clearly there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of things will improve, but you do have an advantage over everybody else. I'm afraid we have to stop at this time because the next panel's starting. So thank you, gentlemen, and thank you as well.
Thank you, Mr. Devi. I request you to please present mementos to our panelists. Mr. S. Machendranathan, Chairperson, Airports Economic Regulatory Authority. Mr. Devi, please do the honors.
Will I?
Yes. That's Mr. Harsha Raghavan, Managing Director and CEO of Airbridge Capital Private Limited. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Machendranath, you can stay back. You are a panelist in the next session as well. I will invite the moderator of the next session, Mr. Anthony Smith, Chairman PPP Experts. The session is on creating a checklist of legal and regulatory issues for airport PPPs. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, please, okay, you can come here. I'm extremely sorry, Mr. Devi, skip that. We are yet to hear from Mr. Devi after this panel as well. All right, so Mr. Smith is here with us. This session, as I was mentioning, is on creating a checklist of legal and regulatory issues for airport PPPs. The panelists, Mr. Durgesh Singh, Partner, Link Legal India Law Services, Mr. Jatin Aneja, Partner, Head of Projects and Infrastructure Practice, Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas and Company, Mr. T. Mohan Chandran, Advisor, Aerodynamics, and ex-DGCA, Deputy Director, Aerodrome Design and Licensing. Mr. Machendranathan is already here with us, and I also invite Dr. Vasudevan S., Director and Global Lead, Airports KPMG India, to kindly join us. We need one more chair. Yes, it's coming. Dr. Vasudevan. Dr. Vasudevan, I believe he'll join us in a couple of moments. In the meanwhile, I will start introducing the experts on the days as the head table is being set. Mr. Anthony Smith, Chairman PPP Experts, he was here with us in the inaugural session as well. Solicitor of the Supreme Court of Judicature, England and Wales. He has worked with Denton Hall, Eversheds, Nabarro Nathanson, joined Simons & Simons, set up a farm project consultancy, was also a partner with Curtis Mallet, Prevost, Colton Mosley. He's a lead specialist in the United Nations PPP team of specialists, having served as the head of the United Nations PPP Readiness Task Force, chairman and head of the legal department of Ultra Capital, associate expert of UNDP Asia Pacific, and patron of Charity Heart. Well, that was a little bit about Mr. Smith. The bio really reads long. Mr. Durgesh Singh, Partner in Projects and Infrastructure Practice of Link Legal India. The law services has its office all over India. Mr. Singh has over 11 years of experience in practice areas of infrastructure, mergers and acquisitions, project finance and commercial transactions. He has represented clients on numerous transactions of developing financing and commercial transactions related to aviation and infrastructure projects and airports, roads, ports, power, urban transportation, oil and gas. His recent representative transactions include advising the client on SpiceJet Boeing mega deal of purchase of 205 passenger jets for $22 billion at list prices, advising client from stage of bidding till execution of concession agreement for the new Greenfield International Airport and at Goa. Also involved in existing airports at Bengaluru and many more other international airports. We have with us Mr. Jatin Aneja, Partner, Head of Projects and Infrastructure Practice, Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas and Company. Extensive experience in project and project finance related to transactions in energy, roads, ports, airports, railways, power, oil and gas sector in India. Involved in advising various Indian as well as multinational companies. Mr. T. Mohan Chandran, Advisor, Aerodynamics and ex-DGCA Deputy Director, Aerodrome Designs and Licensing. One of the rare aviation professionals with exposure, competency and opportunity to conduct audits, inspection, checks for airline engineering facility, including component overhaul and testing, airline operations, including cabin crew and weight balance sections, aerodrome facility, including air traffic control, CNS. Well, I'm not getting into everything. I think I should leave some more time instead for the panel to speak. Mr. Machendranath and Dr. Vasudevan were with us earlier, so I will not get into repeating their introductions. I will leave the panel to Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much. We're going to try and develop a checklist for the legal and regulatory issues for airports PPPs, and I would like to be fairly liberal on how we look at this legal and regulatory side, including policy, government policy, and also obviously there's always a split between how do you regulate within a concession agreement or do you regulate by government regulation or authority regulation. So we should also properly incorporate issues arising from the concession or PPP agreements for these concessions. We have a very experienced and senior panel here. I think I'm rather fortunate in having more than John did earlier, but we've got both the private sector side and also, again, the regulatory side, so we should be having quite an interesting debate. So I don't want to talk too long for myself, but as we've got so many, so in order to create this checklist, it would be worth just getting the views of each participant, and I suggest we start with Jatin, who I know has got a number of things to say about it.
Thanks. So I think just kind of jumping into the topic, the issue of creating a checklist kind of really depends on what is the nature of the transaction one is really looking at. And for us as, as a law firm which advises the airport sector, it really depends on whether we're talking about like a privatization of a brownfield airport like a Delhi or a Bombay, or are we talking about a greenfield airport like Bangalore or Hyderabad, or are we talking about, only the terminal participation like on the anvil, things like Jaipur or Ahmedabad, because the degree of risk basically differs from each of these transactions. So if you're really looking at a greenfield airport, then obviously land use, environment, pre-development works, risk of those really matter a lot, and it is essentially important to have a checklist where those risks are predominantly there. However, if you look at something like a brownfield airport, like a Delhi or a Bombay airport, then what is of paramount importance is how the change management is going to be, how the issues of people in terms of workmen transferring from old management to the new management take place. What is going to be the change in the regulatory framework? Are there any issues in terms of novation of underlying contracts? etc. If you're looking at something like Ahmedabad or Jaipur airport models that we're talking about right now, the big issues to my mind are there, and around which the checklist will get created, is who does capital addition, and if it's airport authority which has to do capital addition, are there any obligations on them to do that? Are there any service standards for the government side of it or Airport Authority of India? You can't really have a terminal operator having a service standard without a corresponding service standard on the air side part of it. What kind of penalties or what kind of tariff model are you really looking at? So the basic driver to creating any checklist is what is the allocation of risk that is being undertaken by the underlying contract. And for that, obviously the concession agreement is the paramount document. Second comes obviously how the regulator is going to look at it and what kind of tariff fixation is the regulator going to do on the underlying model. So, those are the parameters which we look at while fixing or while creating a checklist for something like this.
Thank you for that. Do you want to respond at the end, or? Yes, we'll get everyone to bat first and then change over to the regulator. So,
Good evening, everyone. So I had a couple of points to make, but considering the lot of points have already been made, so I have come up with an alternative list, and considering the immediate vicinity of Chairman Sir that I've been sitting in, so I'll make a couple of relevant points. One is a very broad point, basis the discussions which I've been witness to since morning about the development potential, about the growth potential. Let me just add, this is all unprecedented. The numbers that we're talking about, Binay, in his presentation, threw a lot of numbers at us, and and the government representatives were again very, very optimistic about how things will pan out. And we are currently number 9 in aviation, slated to be number 3 in 2020, and number 1 in 10 years' time. But let me reiterate, everything has to move in perfect consonance, and which is quite unprecedented, what we have witnessed so far. So I'll be pleasantly surprised if the unprecedented nature actually comes true. One specific point I would like to raise, as Mr. Siddharth Kapoor also mentioned earlier, about how the regulator and specifically how the appellate tribunal of ERA has, lagged behind in speedy resolution of certain, let me put it, disagreements with ERA's order, which a lot of developers have encountered. One particular one, of course, is the order on normative approach, which ERA came out with last year around June. Just from a background perspective, ERA had put a cap, a ceiling limit on capital allowed on construction of terminal and runway. So 65,000 rupees per square meter as far as the terminal is concerned, and 4,700 rupees per square meter as far as the runway is concerned. If we go into the merits of how the calculation was arrived at, how Cochin International Airport was used as a benchmark, there are a lot of grounds that we can discuss, but just for the fact that ERA Act itself, Section 13 of ERA Act, talks about determination of tariff basis the capital expenditure incurred, as opposed to preempting and projecting the capital expenditure and putting a ceiling on it. So disagreements there, but ideally the appellate tribunal should have settled it by now, but for a variety of reasons that has lagged behind. What it has done, sir, is there seems to be a contradiction with the concession agreement now. The Goa concession agreement puts a condition, puts almost parameters under which the airport would come up. Top 5 in Southeast Asian region, that's a benchmarking comparison which needs to come up. That does not go well with the ceiling on the capital investment that we are talking about, 65,000 per square meter. So both those things, the contradiction between the regulator and concession agreement is something that we need to quickly reconcile with, whether tribunal needs to quickly dispose this of, or I mean, it's just how it is. Another thing that I would like to point out, I'm just touching on broad points in the concession agreement with respect to the new airports. There is no standardization of concession agreement despite similarity in projects. The two recent ones being Navi Mumbai and Goa. For a thing as basic as change in law provisions, how it comes to rescue of the developer. In one of the airports, there is a recourse of change in law, other one it's not. Now that is something which is not concerned with the particular specifications of the airport or the regulator. That is something, a legal framework which needs to evolve. Either you give it or you don't give it. One last point I would like to make is earlier in the day, we were discussing how the national civil aviation policy has been very well thought out and very well put. Visionary, yes, it has been, but could have been better. Just one quick example. This particular national civil aviation policy liberalized the end user restrictions on the commercial property development in all future AAI and PPP airports and the existing AI airports. But for some reason, it excluded the existing PPP airports. Now, earlier this year, we went to the court, Delhi High Court, against this particular provision. And we have actually got a relief as well from the Delhi High Court, where the court has termed it ultra vires of the Constitution itself. So something which involved a lot of discussions, a lot of stakeholders discussion, and which was supposed to be a game changer, still had a very, very basic lacuna in place. And that is something which all of us have to guard against. Because you have to make, as we discussed in the last session, the financial attractiveness of the projects. Even the existing projects have to be made financially attractive to keep the investments churning in. I think I'll just pass on the marks. Otherwise, I can go on. Thanks.
Namaskaram to all. I'm ex-regulatory authority personnel. Now I'm an independent consultant. So I would like to now come out with some of the points which now Machidanandan Sahab already has briefed. I'll just find out in that actually what's happening for this, the regulatory framework, which is the backbone for aviation ecosystem. We all know that on we may work in a different domain or segment, but with a common goal that safe and efficient and economic operation of aircraft. This is what we all have a common goal. But most of the time, when you make a regulation, it is safety and efficiency is only considered. And economic consideration has come recently. Earlier, all the regulations, the economic exposure to the regulatory authority is very minimum, because the most of the regulatory authority personnel who are working are not industry-driven people. They're all technocrats, not technical expertise, but are not exposed to the, not having the exposure to the aviation industry issues and problems. So the economic point is a very, very important role when you make a regulation framework for benefit of the any investment or anything in aviation growth. The number one is the is already informed that it is when you considering any point of that awarding any contract, we are taking the tariff or a revenue sharing, or we also always will say that profit sharing. Now the problem is now we consider only the main airport which is already having the passenger movements, and all the regulations are based on that. But we are not considering that in India there are 250 airports. It is all very small airport, state government airports, it is upcoming airports, evolving airports. These airports also now, because of the government's the vision of the UDAN on regional connectivity, to which all the infrastructure has to support. The support has to come from the 250 odd the state government airports. In that, if you see that already there are around 97 are state government are abandoned. It is there in India. And there are already 21 of airport authority airport are also abandoned and non-operational. These are the airport is going for regional connectivity and it's going for the growth. But all this regulation what we make, either you make it as revenue sharing or profit sharing, or we have to consider there is tariff charges. Now, very important now in this place, I have come across one other point where the government awarding the land for construction of the airport,